The desert winds howled outside the military camp as the sun dipped below the rocky horizon. War had returned to the outer colonies. Dust clung to every surface. Soldiers moved between tents with rifles slung low and eyes sharp. No one trusted. The silence that came before an ambush. That evening, however, something even stranger entered the camp. Private Mason Vell, a seasoned human soldier, had just finished a 16-hour patrol. His muscles ached. Sweat soaked through his undershirt. He pushed the tent flap aside and dropped his gear on the floor. He didn't expect what came next. He heard murmurs outside. A few soldiers stood frozen near the edge of the tent row, whispering and pointing. Mason stepped outside again and followed their gaze. Between the tents stood a lone figure, barefoot, blue-skinned, and visibly trembling in the evening light. An alien girl. She looked no older than 20 in human terms. Her silver-white hair flowed down her shoulders, and her clothes were torn. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself. No one moved toward her. She was from the Alarian species or race, not allied with either side in this war. Seeing one here, unarmed and alone, made no sense. Mason's first instinct was caution. But her eyes caught his, wide, frightened, lost. In that moment, she didn't look like a threat. She looked like someone who didn't belong anywhere. "She's got no tent," someone said behind him. "Not our problem." Mason didn't respond. He approached her slowly, palms open. The girl flinched but didn't run. Her knees looked ready to give out. She hadn't spoken a word. Mason gestured to his tent and pointed at the cot. "You can rest inside," he said quietly. She blinked, then gave the smallest nod. Her movements were slow, careful, like someone expecting to be struck. Mason let her in. Inside his tent, she sat on the edge of the cot and stayed silent. He noticed her breathing was shallow, and her skin shimmered faintly under the lamp. Mason opened a ration pack and passed it to her. She stared at it, sniffed, then slowly took a bite. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Mason sat across from her, watching closely. Finally, she whispered something in a strange accent. "Why help me?" Mason leaned back against a crate. The question hung in the air. He didn't have an answer. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe curiosity. Maybe loneliness. Whatever it was, it pushed him to make a decision he knew might get him court-martialed. "You're not safe out there," he said. "Stay tonight. I'll figure it out tomorrow." She nodded again and curled up on the cot. Her thin clothes barely protected her from the night chill. Mason handed her his spare blanket. She looked at it, then at him, unsure what to do. When she finally wrapped herself in it, she looked like she might cry. The night dragged on. Mason didn't sleep. He kept his rifle close and listened to the outside patrols making rounds. Once or twice, someone passed by and paused at his tent. But no one entered. The girl slept lightly, twitching in her sleep like someone chased by memories. Mason watched the shadows move across the canvas walls. He didn't know who she really was or what she had seen. But something told him she carried more than just fear. There was a reason she came here. And Mason had just become a part of it. As dawn approached, she woke with a gasp. Her eyes darted around until she saw Mason still, sitting nearby. She relaxed only slightly. Then, for the first time, she spoke clearly. "My name is Relia." Mason nodded slowly. He had no idea what he had just stepped into, but he knew one thing already. That night had changed everything, because this war wasn't just fought with bullets and drones anymore. Sometimes it walked into your tent, sat on your cot, and stared you in the eye with silent, glowing fear. And that was how the weirdest night of his life began. Relia didn't move much after introducing herself. Her voice had a soft humming quality, and her eyes never left Mason's face. She sat curled in the blanket, legs tucked under her, watching him like he might vanish if she blinked. Mason offered her a canteen of water. She took it with both hands. Her fingers were long and slender, tipped with faintly glowing nails. He realized she was dehydrated, her skin showing tiny cracks that shimmered when she moved. She drank carefully, like she wasn't sure if she deserved it. Outside, the camp was waking up. Boots thudded on sand. Vehicles hummed. A drone zipped past the tent flap with a sharp buzz. Mason sat up straight, alert. He hadn't reported Relia. If command found out, they'd drag her off to interrogation. Or worse, and they'd punish him for hiding her. "I need to know something," Mason said. "Why were you out there alone?" Relia glanced at the flap. Her eyes narrowed like she was remembering something sharp. Then she looked back at him and answered without hesitation. "My people left me behind," Mason frowned. "That wasn't a mistake. You didn't abandon someone by accident in a war zone." He leaned in, voice low. "Why?" She hesitated. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Something inside your base." Mason stiffened. "When?" "2 nights ago," she said. "I came here looking for someone. But they found me first. So they locked me away. Then they left me to die." Mason looked at her differently now. She wasn't just a lost girl. She might be a spy. Or maybe something worse. But she didn't look like she was lying. Her body trembled with every word. She was terrified of whatever truth she carried. "You saw what exactly?" She shook her head. "Not yet. You wouldn't believe me." Mason exhaled and leaned back. His hand rested on the rifle beside him. Not to threaten her, but because now the stakes were real. If she was right, then this wasn't just a refugee hiding in his tent. This was a live grenade. A soldier outside shouted his name. Mason froze. The voice grew closer. It was Sergeant Hart. Mason knew the man well. Too well. If Hart caught wind of Relia, things would go bad fast. "You stay here," Mason whispered. He slipped out of the tent, closing the flap behind him. Hart was walking straight toward him, holding a datapad. "Private Vel, command wants all patrol logs updated by noon. Your shift from last night's missing a few checkpoints." Mason nodded. "Had to reroute. Sandstorm pushed me back an hour." Hart squinted. "No mention of that on sensors." Mason didn't flinch. "I didn't stop to log it. I'll fix it now." Hart looked past him at the tent. Mason shifted to block the view. Hart said nothing more and walked off. Mason waited until he disappeared behind the crates, then ducked back inside. Relia hadn't moved. But now she looked at him with fear. "I have to get you out of here," Mason said. "If they see you, they'll assume the worst." "Where would I go?" she asked. Mason paused. He didn't have an answer, but he had an idea. There was a supply vehicle heading out at dawn tomorrow. Unmarked, used to restock the outposts. He could hide her in the cargo bay and ride along. Once they cleared the zone, she'd be safe. "Hopefully, you trust me?" Mason asked. Relia tilted her head. "No, but I have no choice." That honesty hit harder than expected. Mason nodded. "Then we'll move at first light." Relia didn't argue. She just lay down again, her eyes watching the roof of the tent. Mason sat beside the flap, weapon ready, senses sharp. Night would fall soon. One more night, just one. Then he could be free of this. But deep down, he knew something had already changed. He wasn't just helping an alien girl anymore. He was stepping into something bigger than orders, bigger than war. And when the morning came, he'd have to face the consequences, even if he had no idea what they were yet. The night returned, and the desert turned cold. Mason stayed alert inside the tent, listening for footsteps or raised voices. Every sound outside made his grip tighten on his rifle. But nothing unusual happened. No alarms, no search parties. Just the usual rhythm of a military base, trying to pretend everything was normal. Relia hadn't spoken much since they planned the escape. She sat wrapped in the blanket, silent and still. Mason noticed her body was healing quickly. The cracks in her skin had faded. Her eyes glowed a little brighter now, and her breath had steadied. "Do you always heal this fast?" Mason asked, breaking the silence. Relia looked at him, then nodded. "My kind are born to survive. But it only works when we feel safe." That answer made him pause. There was something in her voice, soft but steady. She wasn't just scared anymore. She was watching him too, learning him. As if deciding whether he truly meant to help. "Is this your first war?" she asked suddenly. Mason blinked. "No, this is my third." She tilted her head. "Do humans get better at it with time?" "No, we just stop asking why we're fighting." Relia didn't speak again. The air between them grew quiet, but not heavy. There was a strange peace there, even as the camp prepared for the next day's dangers. Outside, the hum of patrol drones echoed against the rocks. But inside the tent, time moved slower. Mason checked the military schedule on his wristpad. The supply truck would depart just after sunrise. They have to reach it quietly, using the rear storage alley that snaked behind the tents. Risky, but it was their only shot. He looked over at Relia. Her eyes were closed, but she wasn't asleep. She was breathing steadily, like someone meditating. He lowered his rifle and leaned back against the support pole. "You know," he said, "helping you might end my career." "I know," she replied without opening her eyes. "I might even get sent to a labor colony." "I know that too." "Still worth it?" he asked. She opened her eyes now, locking them with his. "Yes." Mason didn't answer. Something about her gaze stopped him from thinking logically. There was no fear in her expression anymore. Just calm, deep understanding. She wasn't human. But in that moment, she felt more real than most people he'd ever met. A soft knock at the tent flap made Mason jump. His hand shot to the rifle as he turned. Relia tensed too, ready to move. "But..." The voice that followed was quiet. "Private Vel, you awake?" It was Corporal Rise, a friend. Mason opened the flap just enough to look out. Rise stood alone, holding a metal box. His eyes scanned Mason's face, then glanced inside the tent before Mason blocked the view. "Just drop in your extra ammo." "Didn't see your crate in the pile." Mason nodded. "Thanks." Rise didn't move. He lowered his voice. "You all right? You seem off." "Just tired," Mason replied. Rise didn't believe it, but didn't push. He handed Mason the box and gave a short nod. "Careful out here. Things feel weird tonight." When he left, Mason locked the flap tight. He turned back to Relia. She had stood up now, her expression more alert. "They're starting to notice," she said. Mason knew it too. The clock was ticking. One wrong move and the whole base would be on alert. He checked his gear one last time. Then he looked at her seriously. "When we move, we run silent. No stopping, no noise. You stay close. And we don't split up." Relia nodded. "Understood." The tent was packed quickly. Anything extra was left behind. Mason handed her a small breathing mask just in case they hit the dust zones. Then they waited for the right moment. At the first deep rumble of the supply truck's engine, Mason opened the flap and peeked out. The rear path was clear. No guards. No drones. He signaled to Relia. They slipped out under the cover of shadows, sticking low between supply crates and cargo nets. Every few feet Mason checked behind them. No movement. No voices, only the slow, pounding rhythm of his heart. They reached the back of the truck. The side door was unlocked, just like he hoped. Mason opened it and helped Relia inside. The space was cramped but dark. She slid into the corner and pulled the blanket tight around her. Mason climbed in and closed the door quietly. Then they waited for the vehicle to begin its journey. Every second felt longer than the last. But Mason didn't speak. He sat in silence, next to a girl he had known for less than 2 days, hiding from his own command, not knowing where the road would Take them. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like just another soldier. He felt like someone finally doing the right thing. Asterisk. The supply truck rumbled across the dry land, its wheels kicking up dust into the cool morning air. Inside the metal container, darkness wrapped around them. Relia sat with her knees to her chest, her glowing eyes fixed on the locked door. Mason sat across from her, rifle at his side, heart beating slow but heavy. Neither of them spoke for the first hour. The space was tight and filled with storage crates, the hum of the engine masking the sound of their breathing. Every time the truck hit a bump, Relia flinched. Mason watched her closely, noting every reaction. She looked more tired now, her body still healing from whatever she had escaped. How long until we stop? She whispered. Couple more hours. Mason answered. She nodded, but didn't relax. Her hands clenched the blanket tighter. Mason knew this ride wouldn't be enough to keep them safe. Once the cargo was dropped, soldiers would check the crates. They needed a plan before that happened. We'll jump out before they unload, Mason said. There's a slope just before Outpost 9. That's our chance. Relia looked at him. Will we survive the fall? If we time it right, he said. There was a long pause. Then she spoke again. You're risking everything. You already said that. I mean it, she insisted. They won't just punish you. They'll brand you, lock you up, maybe worse. Mason stared at her. I know what I'm doing. Relia looked away. Then you're braver than I thought. The truck turned sharply. Crates shifted slightly, and Mason used one hand to steady himself. Dust filtered through the thin vents, bringing the scent of the desert inside. Relia leaned her head back against the wall, her voice soft again. I saw a human inside your command tower. Not just any human, a scientist. He was working on something. Hidden under the surface. Mason narrowed his eyes. What kind of something? She looked at him and said a word he didn't expect. Harvesting. Mason's blood chilled. What do you mean? Relia's expression turned hard. Your base is built over one of our sacred chambers. There's energy beneath it, old energy. My people used to protect it. But now they're using it, taking it, and it's killing the land. Mason shook his head. That can't be. We were told the area was clear, empty. That's a lie, she said. The chamber is alive, and the humans disturbed it. That's why I came, to stop them. Mason's breath slowed. Things were moving far beyond what he imagined. This wasn't just about sheltering an alien girl anymore. This was about something buried under their feet. Something dangerous. If they know you saw this, he said, then they're not just abandoning you, they're hunting you. Relia gave a slow nod. That's why I ran. The truck began slowing down. Mason crawled to the side panel and peered through a narrow vent. Hills were rising in the distance. The engine hissed and gears shifted. They were getting close. We're almost there, he said. Relia stood up, bracing herself. Mason checked his gear again. 2 mags, 1 flare, a pocket knife, nothing fancy. They'd have to rely on timing and speed. He looked at her and asked, one last time, you ready? I have to be, she replied. The truck hit a sharp bump. Mason unlocked the emergency hatch on the side wall and held it halfway open. Wind rushed in, dry and strong. Relia crouched beside him, her hair whipping against her face. Mason counted under his breath, colon 1.2.3. He jumped. Relia followed a second later. The fall wasn't clean. They rolled hard down a dusty slope, crashing through dry brush and hitting loose rocks. Mason hit the ground hard and rolled again. Before stopping, he grunted and pushed himself up. Relia landed a few feet away, groaning but unharmed. She stood quickly, brushing dirt from her arms. Mason limped over and grabbed her hand. Come on, we can't stop here. They ran along the edge of the hill, staying low. The supply truck rolled away in the distance, unaware of its two missing passengers. Mason led her toward a rocky outcrop he remembered from patrol routes. It had an old sensor blind spot. They reached it in minutes and ducked behind a cluster of stones. Both of them were breathing hard. Mason checked his wristpad. No alerts yet. They had time. Not much, but enough. You did well, Mason said. Relia looked at him. Her eyes were brighter now. Not just from her skin, but from something stronger. Hope. And in that broken stretch of desert, hidden under the sun, they took their first breath of freedom together. But freedom never came without a price. The heat of the day grew stronger as the sun climbed high. Mason and Relia stayed hidden beneath the rocks, using shadows to shield themselves. They had escaped the camp, but danger still followed them. Drones patrolled the skies, and distant hums from scanners buzzed like angry insects in the wind. Mason studied his wristpad. The satellite connection was unstable. They were outside the base's tracking zone, but only by a few kilometers. It wouldn't take long before command realized someone was missing. And when they did, the search would begin. We need water, Relia said quietly. Mason nodded. He pulled out his last canteen and handed it to her. She drank carefully, then passed it back without a word. Her hands trembled slightly. Mason saw the strain in her face. She was pushing herself to stay strong. There's an old Kun tower 2 miles east, Mason said. Abandoned, we can rest there. Will it be safe? For a while. They began walking across the rocky terrain, sticking close to low ground and avoiding open stretches. Mason led the way, keeping one hand near his rifle. Relia followed closely, her feet light and silent. She moved like someone trained to vanish when needed. As they walked, Mason asked a question that had burned in his mind since she mentioned the underground chamber. What happens if they keep harvesting the energy? Relia's voice was firm. The land will die. The energy is part of the world's balance. If it's drained, storms will rise, soil will rot. Life will disappear. And your people? They left long ago. But some of us stayed behind. Guardians, watchers. I was one. Mason didn't respond at first. He stared ahead, thinking. Why didn't they stop us sooner? Relia looked at the sky. Because your kind never listens until something breaks. That truth hit hard. Mason knew she wasn't wrong. He had seen the cost of war. Cities turned to ash. Forests turned to dust. Now they were doing the same here, only slower and more. Quietly, he kept walking, each step feeling heavier. They reached the tower by midday. The structure was rusted and leaning slightly. Panels hung loose from the frame. But the interior was intact. Mason pried open the door and checked inside. Empty, cool, safe for now. They entered and sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. Mason set his gear down and rubbed his face with his hands. Relia closed her eyes and sat still. Her breathing had slowed again. She looked peaceful, even as the world hunted them. I used to think I understood war, Mason said. Relia opened her eyes. What changed? You. She tilted her head. Why? Because you're not what I expected. She didn't smile, but her gaze softened. Most humans see us as threats. I don't, he said. Not anymore. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It felt like something between them was shifting. Not trust, not yet, but something close, something real. Mason looked at her and saw not an alien, not a mission, but someone who had lost everything and still stood tall. Suddenly, Mason's wristpad lit up. An alert flashed across the screen. Unauthorized escape detected. One soldier. One unknown entity. Last seen Sector Delta. Search team deployed. They know, Mason said. Relia stood quickly. Then we move again. Mason packed his gear and opened the tower door. But before stepping out, he paused. You sure you still want to run with me? Relia met his eyes. I've come this far with you. I'm not stopping now. They moved back into the wilds, following the edge of an old riverbed. Dry and cracked, the ground echoed beneath their boots. Birds scattered from trees as they passed. In the distance, the sound of hovercrafts began to grow louder. Mason quickened his pace. They're close. We need cover, Relia said. They found a shallow cave nestled between jagged rocks. Mason signaled her inside. They crouched in the dark, holding their breath. A drone passed overhead, its light sweeping the canyon. Then it vanished. Relia exhaled slowly. That was close. Mason looked at her. Too close. She touched the stone wall. It pulsed faintly beneath her fingers. A soft glow passed into her skin. Mason stared, confused. What is that? The land remembers me, she said. It still knows I'm its guardian. Mason didn't know what that meant. But he saw the way the color returned to her face, how her strength grew in seconds. Whatever connection she had with this place, it was real. And for the first time, Mason realized something else. He wasn't just helping her escape. He was helping her return. The cave protected them for most of the day. Cool air drifted through narrow cracks in the stone. Mason watched the sky through a small gap in the rocks while Relia sat cross-legged behind him, resting her hands on the earth. Her skin glowed softly where it touched the stone. Mason lowered his voice. Is it helping you? Relia nodded. It's old energy, weak now. But it still answers. He had seen strange tech before. Aliens with weapons and armor beyond human science. But what Relia did wasn't technology. It felt like something deeper, something alive. She wasn't just surviving. She was reconnecting with something sacred. We can't stay here long, Mason said. They're scanning sectors fast. Relia opened her eyes. Then we must go to the chamber. Mason turned to her. Where is it? Beneath the cliffs, past the bone trees. I can guide us. He hesitated. That puts us closer to the command tower. She looked at him firmly. Yes, that's where they're drilling. Mason knew. It was madness, but running was no longer enough. He'd seen what she carried. He believed her now. This wasn't just about escape. This was about stopping something wrong before it spread. They left the cave at dusk, using the falling light to mask their movements. The wind picked up, stirring dust into the sky. Mason checked his wristpad again. A red signal pulsed. Search parties were closing in from two sides. They didn't have time to go around. They'd have to go straight through the ridge. As they moved, the trees changed. Leaves gave way to bone-colored branches. The ground turned black and soft beneath their boots. The air smelled strange, like metal and ash. Relia walked faster now, guided by instinct. Mason followed closely, his hand never leaving his weapon. Then she stopped. Her hand pointed toward the ground. Here, she said. Beneath us. Mason looked around. Nothing stood out. Just dead trees and dust. But she knelt and placed both hands on the earth. The ground shimmered. A circle of stones began to pulse with faint blue light. The soil shifted. A hatch slowly opened. You were telling the truth, Mason said. Relia didn't smile. We must go down, now. They climbed into the tunnel. The entrance closed behind them, sealing with a soft hum. Mason flicked on his wrist light. The tunnel walls were smooth, made of something that looked like stone but felt warmer. The air was clean. Too clean. It didn't smell like any cave he had known. The path led them deeper. Relia moved without hesitation. As they walked, lights activated. In the walls. They weren't lights in the human sense. They were glowing veins of energy that pulsed with every step. This place is alive, Mason whispered. It always has been, Relia answered. After what felt like an hour, they entered a vast chamber. The ceiling stretched high, covered in glowing roots. In the center of the room was a tall crystal structure, pulsing with deep light. But something else was there too. Kalan machines, not human machines. Big ones. Wires and drills were embedded into the crystal. Tubes led to barrels filled with glowing liquid. Computers flashed with data. Soldiers weren't present, but the evidence was clear. Humans had found the chamber and started extracting its power. Relia ran to the crystal and dropped to her knees. She placed both hands against it. Her body glowed brightly now. Mason stood guard, eyes scanning the tunnel behind them. "It's dying," Relia whispered. "They're draining its heart. Can you stop it?" She shook her head. "Not alone." Mason stepped forward. "Tell me what to do." She looked up at him. "You're willing? I've come this far." She stood and pointed to the nearest console. "Destroy the controls. Disconnect the flow. I'll heal the core." Mason moved fast. He pulled wires, smashed screens, tore power cells from the machines. Sparks flew. The chamber trembled. Alarms on the consoles flickered and died. Relia pressed her palms against the crystal and closed her eyes. Energy rushed through her body like a wave. The roots above began to glow brighter. Cracks sealed. The hum deepened. The room pulsed with warmth. Mason backed away, shielding his eyes. Then the light calmed. The tremble stopped. Relia opened her eyes. "It's working," she said. Mason let out a slow breath. "We did it." But before they could move again, a voice echoed down the tunnel. "Step away from the core, now." Mason spun around, rifle raised. 3 soldiers stood at the entrance, guns aimed, faces cold. Behind them was Sergeant Hart. Mason knew there would be no talking now, not after what they had just done. Mason didn't lower his rifle. His heart pounded as Sergeant Hart stepped into the chamber, boots crunching on the strange glowing floor. The other soldiers flanked him, weapons aimed. Relia stood beside the crystal, her hand still glowing with its light. Hart's voice echoed coldly. "Step away from her, Vel. You've gone far enough." "She's not the enemy," Mason replied. Hart raised an eyebrow. "You disobeyed orders. You sheltered an alien. You destroyed our equipment. You crossed the line." Mason didn't move. "You crossed it first when you started drilling into a living core." Hart signaled one of the soldiers. The man moved closer, gun steady. Mason took a step to the side, shielding Relia. The air around them shimmered. The crystal pulsed louder, like it sensed danger. Relia whispered, "They can't take it. If they do, it will collapse. The land above will die." Mason tightened his grip. "You heard her. If you care about this planet, you'll leave now." Hart didn't blink. "This planet is already dead. We're here to survive, and power keeps us alive." "You're wrong," Mason said. Hart gave the order. "Take him down." The first soldier stepped forward. Mason fired. The shot struck the floor in front of the soldier's boots. Not to kill, just to warn. The soldier stopped, surprised. Hart raised his own weapon now. Mason knew he was seconds from being shot. Then the crystal behind him roared with light. A blast of energy surged outward. The walls shook. The soldiers fell back, shielding their faces. Relia's voice rose, louder than before. "No more stealing, no more harm." Her body lifted from the ground. Light poured from her skin, flowing back into the crystal. Mason turned to shield his eyes. The chamber burst with color. The machines sparked and melted. The tunnel behind them collapsed in a blast of stone and dust. When it was over, everything was silent. Mason opened his eyes slowly. The soldiers were gone. Buried or scattered. Hart was nowhere in sight. Relia stood where she had been, breathing hard, her glow now soft and gentle. The crystal was whole again. The hum was peaceful. Mason stepped toward her. "What happened?" "I gave the core what it needed. Balance. Are you all right?" She nodded. "Tired, but alive." They didn't speak for a long time. The chamber felt like a temple now, quiet and still. The machines were gone. The danger had passed. Relia turned to him slowly. "You have to go," she said. Mason's chest tightened. "What? This place must remain hidden. If they find it again, they'll return." "Then I'll stay," Mason said. Relia shook her head. "No, you're needed up there. You saw the truth. You carry it now. They'll tell them." He looked at the tunnel, now blocked by stone and roots. "How will I get out?" She placed her hand against the wall. A new path opened slowly, a thin trail of light leading upward. "I made this for you," she said. Mason looked at her for a long time. "Will I see you again?" Her answer was quiet. "If the land allows it." He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. She closed her eyes and leaned into his touch for a moment. Then she stepped back. "Go," she said. Mason turned and walked into the path. It felt warm, like sunlight and wind. Behind him, the chamber faded. When he reached the surface, the air smelled cleaner. The sun was rising. The sky was clear. He stood at the edge of the cliffs, overlooking the land that was still alive. He didn't see the search teams. He didn't hear the alarms. He walked away from the cliffs and didn't stop until the base was far behind him. Later, when he stood before the tribunal, he told them everything about the core, about the machines, about Relia. They didn't believe him. But some listened, some questioned. And over time, the story spread. Not just about a soldier and an alien girl, but about a world that still breathed beneath the surface. And though Mason never saw her again, he sometimes dreamed of her, not as a refugee, not as an enemy, but as a guardian of something worth protecting.